All right, so we can go ahead and get started. So today again, our presentation is about our series, The Importance of Gleaning, Federal Food Initiatives. We wanted to talk about current activity within the federal climate that is promoting different gleaning initiatives and different gleaning work. Our first presenter is Julie Schiff. Julie Schiff is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She works with Region 5. She's an environmental scientist with the EPA Great Lakes office. Ms. Schiff joined the EPA in 2005 as a GSI support analyst in the Superfund division. She is currently the coordinator for the Region Sustainable Management of Food Program and provides technical assistance to a wide variety of stakeholders looking to quantify and improve upon food waste reduction and diversion effects. So I'm going to give the floor over to Julie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Chantel, for that introduction. Give me one moment while I share my screen, please. Make sure I have these going correctly. And can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Okay, so yeah, thanks again. I really appreciate that introduction. As Chantel said, I am the coordinator for the Sustainable Management of Food Program in EPA Region 5. And for those of you who are not familiar, those are the Great Lakes states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. So today I'm going to talk about some of EPA's work related to wasted food. Identifying issues and impacts that all materials have on our environment, society, and economy are a big part of EPA's work. So today, I really hope to help you understand those issues associated with the material of wasted food specifically and understand its impacts across the food system. We'll also look at some key actions and efforts that EPA has taken on to address wasted food. So in the United States, USDA estimates that 30 to 40% of our entire food supply is wasted. And that's at the retail and consumer levels. And that is a huge portion of food that we're wasting. This is available food in the US that goes directly to waste. Now, EPA has collected and reported data on the generation and disposal of municipal solid waste in the US for more than 30 years. Some of our data actually goes back to the 60s. We perform these analyses each year in our facts and figures report, as you see here on the right under measurement. And what we have found is that food is the primary component of municipal solid waste ending up in our landfills. It makes up 24% of all municipal solid waste ending up there. So it is the largest material by weight ending up in our landfills, and it's also the least recovered. Now, the producing, transporting, distributing, storing, cooking, and discarding of all that food that never gets eaten is a huge waste of natural resources, labor, and money. So now, with climate-related disasters increasing, and not just in the US, but throughout the world, there are also growing concerns over food system resilience, food equity and justice, and food availability, which many people experienced even at the onset of our current pandemic. So now we have just I gave a little glimpse into the problem of food waste. Obviously, it's this quantity, right? It's this big amount of food that we're producing to eat that never gets eaten, right? So I'd like to look at some of those impacts associated with wasted food. And you might notice that some of these impacts aren't necessarily visible or tangible, except maybe in your wallets, which is why I think that messaging like today and education and outreach are so important. So I think the biggest and most important impact to highlight related to wasted food is that it impacts our society. As we're wasting over 30 to 40% of the available food supply, we also know that while this is happening, the USDA has recently reported that 10.5 of US households were food insecure at some point in 2020. And according to the NRDC, reducing edible food losses by just 15% could feed more than 25 million Americans a year. So we're wasting, oops, sorry, getting a little trigger happy here. So we're wasting all of this food. And at the same time, 10.5% of US households don't know where their next wholesome and nutritious meal is coming from. And that is a huge impact and a huge problem. So there's also the actual legit cost of wasting food, right? At the retail and consumer levels, the USDA has valued food loss and waste at an estimated $161 billion in the US. We've also estimated that the average consumer, you and I, individuals at home, spend well over $300 a year on food that we never eat. And these costs are related to disposal costs, over purchasing costs, and the cost of lost energy associated with producing that food. And this is this is only half of an infographic that we have about the tomato. And I like to use it because it's something that we can all relate to, because who hasn't wasted a tomato, right? And so some of these are from the Economic Research Service. Thank you, Jean. That estimates that 31% of fresh tomatoes bought by our households are thrown away. And that's 21 tomatoes a year per person. And this is costing over $2.3 billion a year. That's a lot of wasted money and wasted food. And finally, wasted food impacts our environment. EPA recently released an environmental impacts report and found the following resources that you see here on the screen went into growing, producing, distributing, and selling the food that was all ultimately wasted. So it's equivalent to using greenhouse gas emissions of more than 42 coal-fired power plants. It used enough water and energy to supply more than 50 million homes. The amount of fertilizer used in the US to grow all plant-based foods for US human consumption. And the land space that was used to grow all the food that was wasted is equal to the size of California and New York put together. These are some pretty big impacts. And of course, I can't walk away from the impact slides without mentioning climate. So important, right? Especially nowadays. I mentioned previously the greenhouse gas emission equivalency on the previous slide, but I'd like to show that from a different perspective. So more than 85% of greenhouse gas emissions from landfilled food waste are a result of activities that occurred prior to disposal. So including the production, transport, processing, and distribution of food. Now, these impacts are cumulative. So food waste impacts at the consumption stage here are far greater than the impacts here at the primary production stage. And so they just keep growing and growing and growing. And with climate, at the top of our administrators' priorities, this is a really important factor to consider when addressing food waste. So you're probably wondering at this point what else EPA does or has been doing to address this monster issue. We do so much more than just measure quantities of food in landfills, right? And I'm hoping this slide will give you a little bit of a broader perspective on the categories of wasted food work that we focus on. And I'll touch on a couple of these in more detail in the next few slides. But I first want to briefly point out that the work we do is primarily in support of reaching the US food loss and waste goal, which is to cut food loss and waste in half by the year 2030. This is, I'll let Jean talk more about this later on, but this is an EPA USDA goal, which was initially set in 2015. So still getting trigger happy here. Okay, so I've touched on data and measurement, but overall, we also perform outreach and provide technical assistance to stakeholders, like Chantel mentioned. We provide funding opportunities through grants and assistance agreements. We collaborate with partners and stakeholders across the food system, and we perform a lot of research on food waste. and I apologize, I have a cold. So going on that research, it really plays such an important role in our work. It tells us what we need to know to help the US meet that 2030 goal. And it also helps us identify future research needs. So as I mentioned in previous slides, we recently examined the environmental impacts of food throughout the food system. And that report was specifically from cradle to consumer or farm to kitchen. Now that report, I think coming out just a couple of weeks ago is really exciting because this data supports and highlights the need for prevention of food being wasted before it enters a management pathway. And this is all as a means to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In order to combat climate change, we need to do better at keeping food within the supply chain or for human consumption. And much of this work also informs domestic policymakers, other researchers, and the public about the environmental footprint of food loss and waste in the US and the environmental benefits that can be achieved by reducing food loss and waste. So the second part of that report will be finished in the spring, and that will specifically examine the environmental impacts of a range of management pathways. So from landfilling, composting, and anaerobic digestion, just to name a few. Other work that our Office of Research and Development puts out includes original research on emerging issues in food waste management. We've looked at persistent chemical contaminants, we've looked at plastic contamination, and even commercial pre-processing technologies. We also just yesterday actually announced a grant solicitation on research to reduce US consumer food loss and waste as well. So aside from producing data and research, the agency has also produced tools and resources which allow the public to better understand and address wasted food. You're all probably familiar with EPA's food recovery hierarchy that you see here. And the hierarchy is designed as guidance and focuses on different management strategies for wasted food or for food before it even becomes a waste, right? EPA also develops tools and resources designed to assist businesses, local governments, communities, and individuals with the reduction and diversion of wasted food. And the first of which is the Excess Food Opportunities Map. And this is really an interactive map that identifies and displays facility-specific information about potential generators and recipients of excess food. We also have our Food Too Good to Waste Toolkit, which is a whole other presentation on its own, or could be. So keep that in mind, everyone at USDA. This is a community-based social marketing toolkit that EPA designed to reduce food waste at the household level or at the consumer level. And it's a really great kit with a lot of fun little tips and tools involved in using it. We've also developed in collaboration with the USDA and the University of Arkansas, a guide to conducting student food waste audits. And we also have our EPA SMM Web Academy. And I encourage you to visit the web page linked here for so much more information on reduction, donation, composting, feeding animals for both businesses and individuals. Everything we have is housed here at this link. So I know this webinar is a Gleaning component, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what some staff has done across EPA regions in order to assist stakeholders with reduction and diversion of wasted food, and then focus on some of those Gleaning success stories that we've worked on. So here I have two success stories out of our Region 9 office. One is an organization called Produce Good, where this organization participated in our previous volunteer program, Food Recovery Challenge, and they coordinated 36 volunteers a week to harvest, weigh, and crate surplus food to prepare it for distribution to local feeding agencies. This group is unique in that they've really been successful in aligning the timing so that the source of the food is connected with the need as close to the day of rescue as possible in order to optimize cooking and eating potential. And with so few volunteers, I think it's really amazing that this organization in 1 year rescued 86,000 pounds of food and donated as many as 258,000 fresh produce servings for individuals in need. And they did this through well over 150 harvesting events in 1 year. And overall, in all this work, they helped avoid 32 tons of greenhouse gas emissions associated with keeping that food from going to waste. Now, Food Forward has, as you see below here in LA, they have a whole food produce recovery program, which in 1 year rescued over 17 million pounds of perfectly edible fresh fruits and vegetables, which were otherwise destined for landfill in 1 year. This organization I thought was unique and I wanted to share because they launched a new model of distribution directly to clients and communities in need through these produce pop-up distributions, which sounds really fun, right? But what makes them even more unique to the pop-up distributions is that they have hundreds of community volunteers. They need to engage and organize in order to sort and distribute this food, thousands of pounds of fruits and vegetables in these strategically located pop-up settings to benefit those communities in need. And so making the logistics to making something like this work, I can't even imagine what goes into it. And they ended up donating over 300,000 pounds to those in need free of charge. And I can provide links to these stories after the webinar and in my slides after I talk today, so you can read more about them. Now, we other gleaning work associated with EPA is done through grants and assistance agreements. We recently, our Region 3 office and our Region 4 office funded several projects to expand access to surplus farm food while also avoiding that loss. These grants allowed for people living in limited food access areas to purchase surplus farm food at a lower or reduced cost. Now you're probably thinking, why would people in need have to pay, right? Well, these programs are specific to household consumers that don't necessarily qualify for SNAP or other food and nutrition support programs that the USDA works on, but they still don't have the access to the produce that they and their families want and need. So our Region 3 and Region 4 office came up with these really neat earned revenue models that are looking to find unique methods within the food system to benefit not only the environment by keeping this food from going to waste, but benefit everyone involved, from the farmer to the consumer. And the picture you see here is from the Bullet Garden Project. And this garden, these farmers are located in New Jersey, and they implement an innovative technology platform to connect gleaned produce with local buyers and communities in need in Philadelphia. A project strengthens local farmers networks, and it creates new businesses and job opportunities based on the revenue stream that surplus provides. And these are the Grasso girls, as you can see. So our EPA Region 4 office funded the Food Recovery Network in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, the Food Recovery Network is a student-based volunteer network through universities where they go out and glean, or they do all kinds of food recovery and donation work. So what this grant is doing right now is deploying students for gleaning to get fresh surplus produce out to vulnerable neighborhoods in 3 different ways. One way is through a mobile food pantry. The other way is to sell it to a single individual grocery store within a food desert in a specific Atlanta neighborhood community. And also they sell it for distribution through a local food rescue organization. Now, I think that that project is currently underway, and we are awaiting most of the results and for the grant to end for a final report out. And then our Region 4 office also funded 4 Roots, which is a farm project in Central Florida. And this project is designed to strengthen the local food economy by connecting farm supply to food demand for Roots improves access in food deserts through various distribution channels, and they sell produce to existing and new sales outlets at marginal markups, with the profits going back into their programs to purchase more produce and then also sustain staff salaries. So like I said, our Region 3 and 4 office have are hoping this type of earned revenue model hopes to generate new earned revenue for farmers and cleaners and others who help to get the surplus food to those markets. It also is bringing more produce into those limited access areas where nutrition needs are high. Some of the likely outcomes they're hoping for are new jobs, obviously, and new businesses, both of which are crucial path to food security. And to top it off, every bit that's recovered is that much less food loss. And if progress continues as they expect, they hope that these earned revenue models can be scalable and replicable for other cities and towns nationwide. So I will provide links to those. Actually, since these projects are ongoing, I'll provide a link to a BioCycle article on these, and then I'll provide a link to, once everything's finished, I'll follow up and provide a link to the stories summaries webpage for the grants once they're completed. So that's just a few of our gleaning work that we've done related to gleaning. Looking ahead, we're currently in this transition period, right? Where I have a new administration. We are currently developing a new food strategy as a component of the broader national recycling strategy, which is really going to be focused on the circular economy that you see here. As many of you know, we have new infrastructure bill funding that's coming to support these efforts over the next 5 years. So it's a really exciting time for the food program. Separate from this specific strategy, I believe we'll also be building on interagency collaboration with USDA and FDA. And that leads me to my next slide. I mentioned earlier that EPA and USDA announced a US food loss and waste reduction goal to cut food waste per capita in half by 2030. And after announcing that goal, EPA and USDA developed some programs together, the first of which is the 2030 Champions program that you see here in this picture, which are businesses and organizations that have made a public commitment to reduce food loss and waste in their own operations in the US by 50% by the year 2030. And these companies periodically report program results on their websites in support of the goal. Now, EPA recently revised its goal to better align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 12.3. And our revised goal is to cut food loss and waste to 164 pounds per person. And you know what, I'm going to hand this over to Jean, who will discuss the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, more info on that. And she'll also provide us with a more global perspective on food waste as well, but not before I share this final takeaway. And this is a 1917 poster from the US Food Administration, which is actually the predecessor of today's USDA. And I love sharing this because it's really amazing to me that this messaging still resonates over 100 years later. And it's even so much more important now during the current pandemic. And I can't stress enough that by making small shifts in how we manage our food at home can collectively make a huge impact on our environment. The most important thing we can do is to prevent food from being wasted in the first place. And thank you so much. I'd like to now hand it over to Jean. Or did you want to do questions now, Chantel, or do you want to wait until after Jean is done?
We can wait until after Jean's done.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Chantel, do you want me to just start?
I can do your introduction for you. Okay, so for our second half of our presentation, we have Dr. Jean Buxby, who has worked with the USDA for over 25 years, and who is the current USDA Food Loss and Waste Liaison in the Office of the Chief Economist. Prior to this position, she was on detail at the US EPA Resource Conservation and Sustainability Division. For most of her career, she has worked as USDA's Economic Research Service, first as an agricultural economist, and then as a chief of diet, safety, and health economics branch. She is domestically and internationally known for her estimate of food loss at the retail and consumer levels in the United States. Dr. Bugsby received her PhD and MS in agricultural economics from the University of Kentucky. I'll pass it over to you, Jean.
Thank you so much, Chantel. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information with this group. It's my pleasure to be here. I gather you can all see my screen. I wanted to pick up a little bit. Julie mentioned some of the statistics as far as the US, but this is actually, a problem globally as well. And it's been really fascinating. I've been working in this space since my first report to Congress in 2002 on plate waste in our national school lunch program. And it's really been fascinating to see the momentum build both domestically and internationally on this issue. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit of the big picture, first of all, globally, that just as is in our United States, roughly a third of the food produced or globally goes uneaten as well. That's like 14% between the post-harvest retail stages and 17% at retail, food service, and consumer stages. And it's costing over $936 billion each year globally. Another interesting statistic is about a quarter of all the fresh water used by agriculture for crop production each year is associated with food that ultimately goes uneaten. And as Julie mentioned, it has greenhouse gas implications as well. It represents about 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. And I did want to also mention that Project Drawdown did a very in-depth study, and they found of all those different solutions to reduce carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, they found that reducing food waste was the top solution. And so that just really emphasizes the importance of getting this food loss and waste under control. And also, Julie mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which that happened also in 2015, at the same time as USDA and EPA put in our national goal to cut food waste in half by 2030. Essentially, target 12.3 of SDG 12 also calls for having per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels by 2030, as well as reducing food losses along the production and supply chains. The World Resources Institute did publish in 2020 a progress report. Well, how well are we as far as reaching the goal? And found overall we're making very little progress, with some exceptions I'll get to later. USDA is uniquely positioned to help address the problem of food loss and waste through our policies, programs, and guidance. We have efforts throughout the different agencies, a really diverse set of efforts. Big picture, we have research and data, education, outreach, and others, such as grants that I'll talk about in a bit. Turning first to research and data, we do have some research on the economic drivers that are influencing, why produce is left in the field. And also USDA has a long history of estimating food loss at the retail and consumer levels. Essentially, that's the food that goes uneaten at those levels. It's estimated at 133 billion pounds and valued at $161.6 billion in 2010. I just wanted to mention that EPA, USDA, and a nonprofit, a national nonprofit called REFED are the three entities that do national estimates of food loss and waste. And USDA is in the process of updating their estimates. They've done a lot of work trying to update the background conversion factors, and new estimates will be out shortly. Also, we have in-house agencies, Agriculture Research Service and National Institutes of Food and Agriculture, which have really funded a lot of cool innovations. Of interest to you might be functional ice coming out of NIFA. This was a USDA funded innovation out of Auburn University. And essentially functional ice is like a special kind of ice that melts more slowly. And as it melts, it releases spoilage resistant properties. And so this has really great implications for those markets that rely on ice to keep things fresh and safe. And it is being tested internationally and in a few places. So it's really so far. USDA also does a lot of outreach. We have this food keeper app, provides information university, and it continues to be updated. They also do outreach on specific topics, state labeling on food packaging,
Hi, everyone. Give us 1 second. We're gonna, I think the service was bad for Jean this morning. So we're gonna give her a couple minutes to come back in. Just 1 second, please.
I think. Okay. So I was just saying that that USDA does outreach. One of the other things we try and do is spread the word that there are product liability protections in place for those who donate food to qualified nonprofits. And so we have some materials available for that and to clarify some questions about product liability. And that's all from the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Donation Act, which really actually has been around for quite a while. But we're trying to spread the word that it exists and what the protections are. I'm now, let's see, not forwarding. I don't know what is going on here. Here we go. Another thing I wanted to mention is last May, we held a Food Loss and Waste Innovation Fair, which highlighted some of those cool innovations like functional ice. And it also had an exhibit hall with several of our US Food Loss and Waste 2030 champions that Julie mentioned, which is a program between USDA and EPA. And I bring this up because the materials are still available up until the end of this May 2022, if you're interested in looking at those materials. And once we get the CR resolved, I hope to plan another innovation fair, bigger and better, for 2022. We also do a lot of education and outreach materials, easy steps, and these are all to prevent food waste, came out in English, Spanish, and Chinese. And another example is a new compost it fact sheet that we did jointly with EPA, and that is in English and Spanish. These are all available on our USDA Food Loss and Waste website. Chantel's going to share my slides afterwards with all of you. And at my very last slide has the main links for EPA, FDA, and USDA, where you can find a lot of information. We also, USDA has funded community compost and food waste reduction grants the past 2 years. Last year was almost $2 million for 24 pilot projects submitted by local and municipal governments. And the aim was to increase access to compost for agriculture producers, improve soil quality, and encourage innovative, scalable waste management plans that reduce and divert food waste from landfills, as Julie mentioned, was the worst scenario. It's at the very bottom. 2 of these grants that I wanted to highlight for you, that the city of Prescott, Arizona, which collected uneaten food for composting from farmers markets and other entities. They participated and they educated, it's about educating the community about composting and again, reducing food waste and providing high quality compost to gardeners and farmers. Also, a newly funded one just in 2021, the city of Los Angeles was funded, and this one establishes a farmers market food waste drop-off and community composting program that's going to collect food waste around 14 of LA's 15 council districts. And so that's really exciting. These are 3-year grants. I mention these grants too because there's a high likelihood, can't say 100% for sure because of things, but look forward to having more of these community compost and food waste reduction grants. Also on my one of my ending slides, there's links to this information. So in case you might be interested in getting a group in your communities to submit a proposal. And Julie also mentioned we have the federal interagency collaboration between our 3 agencies, EPA, USDA, and FDA. And I just wanted to mention that in this collaboration, we also have working relationships with the Food Waste Reduction Alliance and ReFed. The Food Waste Reduction Alliance is a group of 3 main food industry groups that cover grocery stores, restaurants, and food production essentially. And ReFed's the other entity that does national estimates of food waste. Also, as a side, in addition to our 2030 Champions program, internationally, there's not to be confused with the Champions 12.3 group, which is a coalition of executives from governments, businesses, and international organizations and so forth. And just by the way, the EPA Administrator Regan and our USDA Secretary Vilsack both became Champions 12.3 earlier in the fall. Internationally, there's a lot of success stories building momentum, which shows real promise for the US. Early estimates out of ReFed, though, show that as far as USDA or the United States, moving the needle toward that 2030 goal, preliminary estimates show that we've only maybe made 2% progress on a per capita basis since 2016. So we have a long way to go, and we're really going to need a lot of success stories and strategies to really move the needle. And so one way that could be helpful is really looking at the success stories globally. For example, the United Kingdom's clearly the leader. They have reduced food waste by 7%. So they're more than halfway to that 50% reduction goal for 2030. And they've done a lot of work, primarily, consumer education, working with them to reduce household food waste. Norway's used an interesting tool called a negotiated agreement. Japan's used public appeals and technologies. And the Netherlands has used a public-private partnership, which is quite large, with over 100 different kinds of entities all trying to find solutions and move that needle to reduce food loss and waste. I just wanted to say real briefly, because it's an interesting thing that's coming up on the radar, is this increasing practice in the news to use food waste to feed insects when rearing them for insect protein. And this is really interesting, because the food waste can be turned into animal feed, which then can produce really valuable products. In Decatur, Illinois, they're going to have the world's largest insect protein plant that uses corn byproducts by a plant right next door to feed the insects. Now, that's not food waste, but there are examples, of that worldwide. And actually, USAID has a request for information out, trying to gather information on what's happening worldwide on insect rearing. By the way, the EU has approved the use of mealworms to make flour for human consumption. I'm not saying that the United States is ready for that yet, but there's some opportunities to do small scale insect rearing, particularly close to urban centers where there's a lot of food waste. So just something to think about. And here are some resources to help you find local food banks and pantries for donating excess food, and maybe ones that you might want to develop good relationships and develop new strategies with in your communities. In particular, ampleharvest.org is one site where you can find good places to donate, particularly fresh produce, because this is really, the site is really geared for gardeners, backyard gardeners, to give excess produce. So this would also be appropriate for the kinds of foods that would be in a farmer's market. And Julie mentioned also the excess opportunities map. The last bullet here, I just thought might be of interest to you, because back in the 1990s, former Secretary of Agriculture Glickman did have a big food recovery and gleaning initiative, and it produced a citizen's guide to food recovery that might be of interest to you. Some of the key takeaways is that, we still, as a country and many nations around the world, have a long way to go to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. And really, every one of us has a role to play in reducing food loss and waste. It's all part of our lives, and we all have different opportunities. And but it's a really complex problem, and it's going to take many different solutions. There's no silver bullet where we can do one fix and really get there. It's going to take a lot of different activities. And these solutions will likely include public-private partnerships and consumer education campaigns. And USDA is really helping prevent, reduce, and repurpose food loss and waste. I can't tell you exactly what, but stay tuned. We're working really hard to, like Julie mentioned, with the infrastructure monies, we have the American Recovery Plan Act monies that we are trying to develop proposals for to really implement additional food loss and waste programs. So stay tuned. There should be announcements later in the spring. Here is where I've got the 3 websites for the 3 different agencies. And again, my very last slide has additional resources that may be helpful to you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we can continue with the Q&A. I heard Julie was covering some things while I went out to the ozone for a little while with the loss of my internet connection.
All right, so I was coming off mute. I think we had a couple, I know you were answering questions in the chat, Julie. Was there any other questions that we saw here? Actually, we will be sending out copies of both presentations directly following this presentation. And then
so I actually have a question for Jean, which kind of goes off of what Alan Reed was asking about grant opportunities, which I interpreted more to be as opportunities that can maybe help fund equipment or equipment modifications, things that EPA generally can't provide funding for. Are there opportunities, grant opportunities through the USDA for things like that, Jean?
There have been opportunities through our USDA Rural Development Office, and such as funding cold storage facilities for food banks in rural areas, for example. That's just one example. Yes, actually, I think on the very last slide, I have a link to an AMS page, which has a lot of different funding opportunities across different agencies. It's a real gem of a resource I've found. I simply cannot keep up with all the different kinds of grant opportunities that are available at USDA, but that's a really good place to take a first look. And again, we also have our Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production is a relatively new office, and they're the ones that have that community compost and food waste reduction grants. So that's something that may be of interest to you, all of you.
And I expect the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, for the next 5 years will really expand funding availability across all sectors. And I'd like to really emphasize the importance more than ever of disadvantaged communities and funding for those communities that's going to become available as well.
Mhm. Yes, good points. And yes, we are also, keeping that in mind too, to uh, loop in universities.
I see one more message in the chat from Alan Reed. Says no necessary equipment, but any programs that can help food manufacturers and ingredient companies reduce food waste or food insecurity.
So, our excess food opportunities map, which both myself and Jean mentioned, shows estimates for food loss and waste that different sectors generate, and the manufacturing sector is there. But I have to say that manufacturing companies, like food manufacturing specifically, their bottom line is the most important thing, right? They don't want to waste money, and wasting any type of food byproduct is a waste of money. And I think that manufacturing companies are really unique in that they are creative in finding ways for their byproducts to sell off for another use or another purpose. And so I'm really seeing minimal waste in these companies, unless it's something that there's no use for a product, in which case then they'll sell it or send it to like a digester for energy. I know that, a lot of manufacturing companies in Minnesota, like Kellogg's and some of the larger companies like that in Minnesota do that.
Yeah, as far as the different sectors, the entire food supply chain, some of the, data is not perfect from farm to table, but early indicators show that they are some of the tightest as far as the least percentage that goes to food loss and waste. But also some of these USDA innovations are really geared to help out with some of the excess foods from manufacturing, such as soybean waste being made into cat litter. And one product that became commercialized was the regrained bars, health bars that came out of a California-based company that used brewers, after brewing beer, the byproducts there have been made to make these high protein energy bars. So there's a lot of different clever ideas that the main, or one main point too, is that uneaten food has value, and you want to use it as Julie alluded to this at the food recovery hierarchy, but I want to emphasize that all these different options can provide value to people, businesses. It can be new products. It could be valuable soil amendments of compost. It could be feeding animals. If the food is really wholesome, let's get it to those who in need. So lots of opportunity.
Well, those were the last comments that I saw in the chat. I want to thank you both for coming and giving such great presentations. I found the information very informative, and I do plan to send a copy of this presentation out, everyone, with the copy of Jean and Julie's presentation slides. So we do have our third quarter Gleaning presentation that will be coming up in March, and that will be with the Food Rescue app management team. So I look forward to seeing you both again and working with you both again. And thank you for joining us. Do you have any last comments or questions from them?
For having me.
You're welcome.
Just thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will send you both a copy of this, and I'll be in touch soon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
day.